you've set out a plan, but then you literally, your first thing is, okay, just focus on the process. Okay, like I've set myself out this series of tasks, this series of milestones to get to my goal. Okay, let's just get involved in the process.
Hello, everybody. This is another episode of the Get Stuff Done podcast. I'm delighted to introduce our guest for today, Dr. James Hooper. He is the Climate Change Practice Leader for Asia Pacific, New Zealand and Australia at the international engineering consultancy Mott MacDonald. He's British, but based in Korea, and he has no doubt got a lot of stuff done in his time. He has summited Everest at the age of 19. He has completed the world's first expedition from North to South Pole, only using human and natural power. He was awarded the National Geographic Adventurer of the Year in 2008. He holds a PhD in Earth and Environmental Science from the University of Wollongong in Australia, as well as a BSc in Geography from Kyunghee University in Seoul. And I've known him for a number of years. He's also been having a lot of public presentations and speeches around the area of his specialization of climate change, and also to do with carbon footprints and climate change risks. So I think we have a lot to talk about. Thanks for being my guest today, James. And straight in with the first question. How do you get stuff done?
Well, how do I get stuff done? So thanks for the introduction, Gordon. Most people, when we think about getting stuff done, we're probably thinking about, a big thing. We're probably not thinking about, how do I put my socks on or something. So
how do I brush my
teeth? So yeah, in the context of, okay, I have a big goal. I'm trying to achieve something which I've kind of set my mind on, which is something I really want to do. Then actually, I think for me, the first thing I typically do is go away and actually, kind of try and sketch out a plan. Okay, like this is something, is it going to take me a year? Is it going to take me 6 months? What's the realistic kind of time frame? What are the realistic milestones along the way in order to be able to kind of get from where I am today to be able to achieve this goal? And then once I have that plan, then it's kind of, breaking each of those parts of the task down into these smaller goals and kind of saying, okay, the first thing I need to do is get to step one. And then I guess then the challenge is, I find, to not actually think about the big goal at all, because that can actually be demoralizing at that point. You want to get there, but
Yep.
You're just setting out, you're a long way from it. You've set out a plan, but then your first thing is, okay, just focus on the process. Okay, like I've set myself out this series of tasks, this series of milestones to get to my goal. Okay, let's just get involved in the process. Just enjoy as much as you can doing it for the sake of doing it. And then at some point along that pathway, you're going to start feeling confident, because you're going to start thinking, I've seen the progress that I've made. I've seen, how far I've come. And at that point, then you can start to kind of open your vision up and then think, okay, now for the final stretch, I can think about, the big goal that I'm trying to achieve. And so I think there's a balancing act there between, you need the inspiration of the big goal to get you started. But then almost when you start your journey, you can't be too focused on it, because it kind of feels unreachable. But then, maybe halfway through that journey, you have to sort of, once you gain that confidence that you're moving in the right direction and that you've made progress, then that's the time to kind of open your eyes again and use the motivation of the big goal to push yourself all the way to the end.
Yeah, I think you've encapsulated that really well. And I guess I want to first focus a little bit on some of the physical challenges that you've done. How did is the most famous mountain in the world? How did you as a teenager come to actually initiate to actually make that expedition and end up summiting at such a young age?
The story is that at my school there was a cycling club, and so I used to go cycling. And in the school holidays, the teacher that kind of ran the cycling club, he would basically give, he was like a 60-year-old bachelor who basically devoted his life to the school. And he gave his time in the holidays to sort of, take us on trips. And so, maybe once each holiday, he would run like a cycling trip for like 4 or 5 days to somewhere in the UK. And so it was kind of a chance, even in itself, we would cycle as part of the club, during term time. Once during the week and once on a weekend. And then it was kind of the goal to okay, I'm going to be in good condition to be able to go cycling in, the Lake District or in Devon and Cornwall or somewhere which was, a slightly more ambitious cycling territory than the lanes of Sussex. Having that opportunity was great because it meant that you kind of got to gain confidence from doing a multi-day cycling trip and cycling maybe 100 kilometers or more each day.
Yep.
At the age of 14, 15, 16. So like a really big opportunity to see the world and to gain some experience. Awesome. But yeah, a friend and I were both part of this cycling club, and we just finished one of these cycling trips, and we were on the train, going back down towards our school, ready for the start of the next term, I think. And we saw an article in the newspaper, and this was May 2003, and it was the 50th anniversary of the first ascent of Mount Everest. So we just happened to be sitting on the train, picked up the whatever it was newspaper next to us and flicked through the pages, and then there was this big article with like a huge double page spread photograph at the top from the top of Everest, and a story about Hillary and Tenzing climbing Everest. And we were 15 years old, and we were just coming back from a cycling trip, and we were very confident because we just we had a good cycling trip, and we were so proud of ourselves, and like, oh yeah, like we managed to get up those climbs without any problem at all. And all of a sudden there was this big challenge in front of us, and we saw that, and it kind of planted a seed of, oh well, why don't we try and set ourselves a really big goal? We could try and climb Mount Everest. And so yeah, so that was what planted the spark. And we got back to school, and as I said earlier, basically we thought, okay, well, if we really want to try and climb Everest, then what do we need to do to get there? Like, how much is it going to cost? Like, how are we going to find that money?
You immediately went into practical mode, like actual thinking about, yes, this we're going to do this.
Yeah. And I think, maybe there's like a thing, I think probably, my age, I actually don't know exactly your age, Gordon, but I was born in 87, right? So like when I was at secondary school, for I think probably about the first time, we actually had like computers and like Google, in the sense that like I remember like when I was 12 or 13, like finding Google and being able to like search for stuff and get answers. And that was probably like the first time that was possible, right? So I remember, we got back from our cycling trip, and it was literally like, hey, let's go on Google and like search, how do you climb Everest? What experience do you need? Like,
I think at that time it was Ask Jeeves, wasn't it? That was
yeah.
Okay, and so then it was a 4-year process essentially to then actually get up there.
Yeah, exactly. So we found out roughly, the kind of skills we'd need and the experience that would be required. We found out what other mountains might be good mountains to try and climb as practice for climbing Everest. Okay. We understood how much it would likely cost for us to, pay for permits and to pay to be on an expedition going to Everest, and obviously trying to understand what the cost would be in terms of training, in terms of, the other expeditions we'd need to do to gain experience, the various kit we'd need, and then try to kind of map out, okay, we've got 3 years left at school. Yep. What do we need to do in these last 3 years of school in order to, fit in each of our holidays? We want to try and do some training, and then we also need to earn the money to allow us to do that training. Where are these things going to end up? And so we came up with a very ambitious plan, which quickly fell apart when we realized that finding sponsorship was not going to be quite as simple as writing a couple of letters. So then our plan got very pared back because initially we were planning to basically go all over the world on these grand climbing expeditions as we prepared. And then as it kind of became apparent that no one was going to quickly stuff us, £500,000 to go and do whatever we wanted. And then we had to obviously think, what can we actually achieve with how much we can earn on the salary of a 16-year-old working in their summer holidays? And then we had to actually really think, okay, what's critical? Like, what are the things that we really need to do? And how can we focus on those? And so, a mixture of, as I said, working in our school holidays, and then using that money to buy, the basic pieces of equipment, jackets, crampons, ropes, all of that kind of stuff. Our school also had a climbing club, so we joined the climbing club. And we got to go to an indoor climbing center once a week, which was great to just learn the basics of climbing, and that formed the basis for then us to, be able to go beyond that and start climbing outdoors as well. We planned a trip to go to the Alps to just learn how do you do ice climbing, how do you travel on a glacier, rope work, these kind of things. And then once we'd done that, then we try to find the cheapest possible expedition that would fit into our summer holidays. And it turned out to be basically the Karakoram mountain range, which is kind of linked onto the western end of the Himalayas in sort of northern Pakistan. It's where K2 is. That area of the Himalayas doesn't have a monsoon in the same way that the Himalayas in Nepal does. So in Nepal, like, you can't climb Everest in July and August because the weather, doesn't allow it. It's too rainy, basically, or snowy. That in the Karakoram, it doesn't have that, so you can actually climb during the summer. But obviously, that meant going to this kind of very remote part of northern Pakistan. And this was 2004. And you may remember that in 2003, in adjacent Afghanistan, a rather large conflict had broken out, which meant that in reality, like, northern Pakistan was relatively safe, but there were definitely concerns of traveling to that part of the world and at that time, so it was more kind of persuading our parents and so on that they were happy. Remember, we were still children, right? So persuading our parents that it was okay for us to travel to northern Pakistan by ourselves in our summer holidays to join a climbing expedition.
So how long did the actual ascent...
In Pakistan, or when we went to Everest?
When you went to Everest.
Okay, so when we went to Everest, we were on the mountain for a total of 8 weeks.
8 weeks, 2 months.
So a lot of that is not actually climbing. Like, you arrive and you have to acclimatize. So you spend a lot of time hanging around, letting your body get used to the high altitude. Right.
Admiring Sherpas who are fully acclimatized, born in and are up and down on a weekly basis. And then, so in the scale of all the things that you've done, how hard was it to summit Everest?
I mean, physically, like, it was hard, right? It was very exhausting. Like, you have like this accumulated fatigue. The high altitude is literally, causing your body to die. There's no other way to put it. Like, once you go above 5,000 meters, the longer amount of time you spend above 5,000 meters, doesn't matter who you are, you will slowly begin the process of dying. And the further you go above 5,000 meters and the longer you're above 5,000 meters, then the faster the more that process will progress. So it really is a case of balancing, trying to acclimatize to the high altitude, which means that your body produces more red blood cells to transport what little oxygen there is, balanced against the fact that the longer you're above there, you're literally gradually dying, and your body's just getting weaker and weaker. You get to the top and you're completely exhausted. Like, this is the thing, is that you get to the top and obviously all of your adrenaline has supported you to get there, and you're like, wow, I've made it, here I am on top of the world, and then you're no longer like excited or motivated once you're on top because you've made it, and somehow you have to get all the way back down, even though you're now utterly exhausted and you've been thriving on the adrenaline to get to the top. And so most of the accidents happen on the way down, and that's obviously when it's very, very dangerous. So for me, like, actually the hardest part of the expedition was the descent from the summit, and I remember we got back to our tent at 8,300 meters, and I remember getting inside the tent, and it must have been like midday at this point. We summited, 7:30 a.m. in the morning, and so I think we got back down to the top camp sometime just after midday. And I remember lying down in the tent and just having zero energy, and like I was terribly thirsty, but like just didn't have the energy to really like pick up a bottle and drink. I just wanted to like lie there, right? And so then finding the will to pick yourself up again, to then walk down to the next camp before it got dark, just to get a bit further down the mountain, so you're not sleeping at that high altitude, or not trying to rest at that high altitude. So that for me was probably the hardest part of the expedition, just forcing yourself to get back up again and keep going, despite the fact you haven't slept for 48 hours and your body's utterly battered.
I can't imagine. I'm not even going to begin to compare me climbing Halasan last week in this. Were there any moments where you had to make a decision on whether to keep going or not? Were there any moments where there were doubts about ability to go on, or the situation, the climate, or whatever, where there was a really important decision had to be made, whether to keep going to make it, or did you, in that sense, have a relatively smooth ascent and decline?
I think we were relatively lucky, and I think there were two moments that stick out. So one was a moment that everyone goes through more or less, which is when you're high up on the mountain, you come across the bodies of climbers that have died, and so that does obviously make you ask questions about why you're there. But you're presented with that reality, and it's a very stark reminder that this could be you in a few hours' time, or you could choose to turn around. So that's like one of those moments. But rather than it being like a hard moment, it's more of like a mental, like emotional moment of like just shock. These are the consequences. I think the moment where I genuinely questioned, like, could I do it, was I think at the start of our summit bid. So by this time we've been on the mountain for I think 6 weeks already, acclimatizing. We put in all that time in preparation. Now Everest is very high altitude, so the air is thin, but it's also very dry. It's not humid, and so most people develop like a cough or a niggle in their throat, and so you end up with this kind of like hacking cough. It's called kumbu cough among climbers, but it's not uncommon for people to start like hacking up blood and stuff, because your lungs and your whole like respiratory system is just getting damaged from all of that cold, thin air, like dry dust. And so I remember it was the first day. It was like it's approximately 20 kilometers to walk from base camp to advanced base camp on the north side of Everest, which is the side we climbed from, and it was about halfway through this day, and I was just hacking, like I was having a nasty cough. Every time I cough, it would just like hurt like deep in my lungs, like like my ribs were about to crack or something, and just feeling really rough. And I think that was the moment for me where I was like, oh, I genuinely don't know like how this is going to go over the next few days. And I guess I was very lucky. Like I climbed Everest with my best friend from school, and we climbed it together, and we had days when I was feeling okay and he wasn't, and days when he was feeling okay when I wasn't. And basically we sat down and he gave me one of his chocolate bars from his pack or something, which is very generous for him, and basically said, yes, don't worry about it, let's just sit down and have a moment, like don't think about tomorrow. Your first thing is, let's just get into advanced base camp tonight, like just take it steady. And so had the chocolate bar, like took a few moments to rest, and then just thought, okay, let's just get to advanced base camp. Anyway, got to advanced base camp and woke up the next day and felt much better, and my cough wasn't as bad the next day, and was able to proceed. We climbed up to Camp 1 on the mountain, 7,000 meters, and then actually the following day from Camp 1 to Camp 2, so up to 7,800 meters or so. Actually, that day my friend had like a really bad day and was feeling absolutely shit, and then the roles were reversed, right? And I was feeling okay, and it was my chance to be like, okay, let's just get through to the end of the day.
And do you feel that experience, that fantastic accomplishment, I should say, has shaped? I mean, you did that as you were becoming an adult. Has it shaped your entire adult life ever since?
I would say yes. Like so in the sense that, I mean, there's two ways, obviously. Like what one is, of course, like if you achieve something like big, then it does help you in some ways, right? I go to something and I get introduced, like as you did, like usually the thing that people introduce is, oh, James, he's climbed Everest, right? And of course, it gives you an advantage in any room you're in, right? Because people are like, oh, that's interesting, like this guy's done something impressive. And so there's no like way that I could say that that hasn't been, hugely beneficial at that level. Of course it has. But I think I would think that the level at which it's been more beneficial is in the confidence to know if I really want to do something that I can do it. Like if I'm willing to apply myself to something fully, then there's no reason why I can't achieve it. And that's this certain level of like underlying confidence, which is like fundamentally changed my life.
Yeah, that's huge. That definitely, that's an entire mindset that right there, which I think will continue to serve you in what whatever you continue to do. But that was one of your expeditions. You also have completed another major massive expedition. How did going pole to pole by human power compare to summiting the world's highest mountain?
I mean, I guess from my perspective, like that for me, pole to pole is the expedition which I really, I'm proud of. And also, Everest in some ways is a little bit one-dimensional, right? You're climbing a tall mountain, and that's not to take anything away from it. Like it is a massive challenge, but at the same time, going from pole to pole, you have to travel through, polar environments. You're in the Arctic and pulling sleds. Then you're sailing across oceans and through icebergs, and then you're cycling across through rainforests and across deserts, and doing days where you're cycling more than 100 miles, so like close to 200 kilometers a day back to back for like 10 days in a row to get the miles done. And then linking that all together stage by stage to get from one side of the planet to the other. The logistics of making that happen and just the journey, like not only is it incredibly tough to do all of those things and to make it all work, but on the other side, the reward of like seeing all of those places and meeting all of the people that you meet along the way, and all of those moments of challenge and all of those moments of beauty and all of that, the total expedition took 396 days. So it literally took a year, a month and a day. And then finalized by us sailing, under Sydney Harbour Bridge and into Sydney. And it's difficult to wrap all of that together. It just it's on a different scale in some ways to Everest.
Right. I mean, yeah. That length of time, almost 400 days, it's just an inordinate amount of time to keep doing the same thing. And as you said, the physical challenge on a daily basis was enormous. What was the most dangerous moment for you during that expedition?
So, I mean, I guess there are different types of danger, right?
Okay.
So, I mean, like in the Arctic, there's polar bears around, and we saw polar bears, and that's a kind of danger which is posed to you, by another animal, like a wild animal, which has a certain risk. But thankfully, we were never really at a big risk. Bikers in the US who carrying weapons and that was scary, but again we were lucky. We're lucky to come from a demographic of the population that is less likely to be affected by gun violence, but nonetheless it was still like shocking for us to see that. We traveled through gangland areas in Mexico, had police escorts for some of it, but I guess all of that is one type of danger. I think the time which was closest to kind of being an emergency was in the Southern Ocean. And the Southern Ocean is basically the sea that wraps around Antarctica. So unlike other oceans, which kind of have a boundary on their east and west side. So the Pacific obviously on its western side has us here in Korea, and on the eastern side has the US, right? And so it's kind of bounded by land. The Southern Ocean literally just circles the globe. There's an area at the bottom there where it just goes around Antarctica, and it means that you have these incredible storms that can kind of just build up and just keep circling round and round. And because of the differential in temperature, because of the cold of Antarctica and the warmer air, in towards the temperate regions, it means you get incredibly strong wind speeds and a lot of these, big storms that basically are generated. And obviously, if you have strong winds at sea and in a sea which there's not much land around, that can result in gigantic waves. And so we got stuck in a big storm, and we had wind speeds that were exceeding 100 kilometers an hour or more. Really, really strong, winds that are so strong that when you were standing on the boat, it was like being in a blizzard, because there's just so much like wind blown water flying past you that it's just white.
Wow.
And at the same time, because of that effect on the sea and the waves, we had waves that were, from the trough of the wave to the crest, that height was higher than the height of our mast, and so our boat was 70 feet. The mast is approximately the same height as the boat is long, and the waves were bigger than that, right? So you'd be on top of the crest of one of these waves, and you'd be looking down into this just massive cavern in front of you. And then when you're at the bottom of a wave, you'd be looking up, and these waves are just towering above you, and it's terrifying, right? Like you feel so small in a boat, and you're bobbing around, and if you're in the Southern Ocean, so this is like one of the things that people like to quote who sail in the Southern Ocean, is that you're closer to rescue on the International Space Station than you are in the Southern Ocean. Not just in terms of
yeah. That was going to be my question.
Both in terms of time and in terms of distance. And so we were in the situation.
That puts things into perspective. Yeah.
We were in this situation, and so these huge waves, our boat's 20 tons, and the huge waves are like battering, the side of the boat, and you're trying to keep the boat aligned. So you have no sails up because the wind's too strong. But even with no sails, the force of the wind on the side of the boat is still pushing you along forwards at a reasonable speed. And so you're fighting to keep the boat aligned so that the waves are basically coming from behind you. Anyway, One of the waves hit us strangely, and we ended up being kind of hit slightly from the side, and it caused the steering to snap, and so then we had no steering. And naturally a boat will turn nose to wind, just from the profile of the boat will turn nose into wind. And so what that means, from sailing from a position where you're basically have your bum into the wind, then the boat tries to turn nose into the wind, and so that means it has to rotate through that axis. At one point it's perpendicular to the waves, right? And we just got really unlucky, and as we were turning perpendicular to the waves, we got hit by a freak wave, which was basically collapsing. It was more like the wave you'd see at a beach, right, where it's kind of breaking down the face of the wave, and that slammed into the side of the boat and turned the boat upside down. Everything went completely black. I was on deck, I was just hanging onto a pole, dangling with my legs in the water. It was dark, because the boat was on top of me. This is a 20-ton boat, and that went on for, it seems like an eternity, but it was probably less than 10 seconds. And then the keel on the bottom of the boat, the weighted fin, if that's what it's for, it's there to obviously try and pull the boat so the bottom is facing downwards, and that thankfully worked as it should, and the boat popped back up the right way again. And but yeah, that was probably the closest moment to death, as it were, on that trip.
So you've explained that if you are essentially incapacitated at that point, then rescue is incredibly slim, basically. And
you're probably waiting a week.
And you started at the north and went to the south? So that was at the end, or that was the beginning?
That was the end. So yeah, we started in the north, and this was the south. Yeah.
Okay. The final days. Okay. And so it's been a while since you have done a massive expedition of this kind of global level. Do you have plans for more? Is it something that you've left behind now, or what's your position on that?
It's a tricky one. So I think so my friend who I climbed Everest with and went from pole to pole with, he died in a climbing accident in 2009, and we were climbing in the French Alps, a group of 4 of us, and my friend and another friend of mine decided to climb one route, and me and this other friend climbed a different route. Yeah, and my two friends who weren't with me, including the one who I climbed Everest with and went from pole to pole with, they died in a climbing accident. And so I guess firstly that was like a big shock for me to like think about, okay, what am I doing? Like what's my priorities? Where am I trying to go? And I took a bit of time out, and I ended up working in London for a year. And then decided actually that I wanted to be part of a community again, and that's why I decided to go to university. And then I ended up in Korea. I decided, be a good idea to study abroad, and that path led me to Korea. So that's why I ended up doing my geography degree in Korea. And I guess since then, me and a number of other friends, we set up a charity in memory of my friends that died. And so as part of that, and 9, we have been doing, it started off less regularly and then it became annually, and now it's more like biannually. But I think we're on the kind of 12th iteration of like fundraising cycle rides, where we take people who haven't necessarily done like a big trip before, like a big adventure, and basically say, look, let's do a cycling trip. Usually we might cycle, say, 2 weeks across Europe. The first trip actually we did was from Land's End to John O'Groats, so actually the reverse, John O'Groats to Land's End. And then we did a few trips which kind of like cycling from the south of France back to the UK, and cycling from Czech Republic back to the UK. And we've also done trips in Korea, so cycling the length of Korea and so on. And basically, as I said, the idea is we try and encourage people who haven't done a big trip like that before to come along and take part of that as part of a group, so that they can get this. When you do something as part of a group, your opportunities to give up are significantly reduced because you feel like an idiot if you do, and you also have the support network of people around you. And so I found, just like my friend and I, we got into adventure through a cycling group. What effectively we were trying to do is to create this opportunity where we could give other people the opportunity to experience adventure through, a multi-day cycling trip, and where they could challenge themselves and like really push themselves to the edge of like where they think their capabilities are, but hopefully, ultimately as a group succeed. And then that could equip them with that kind of confidence to then go forward and start undertaking other challenges. And so I guess in some ways, like, that has satiated a lot of my desire for adventure over the past few years. And I think I also, refocused on thinking, like, what other challenges are there apart from just pure adventure? So like, what other things would I like to achieve, which I maybe need to invest time in, which I could also do. I think I found that the thing about adventure is it in some ways it feels like this very romantic life. And sure, when you're on an expedition, it's amazing. Like, you're living every moment absolutely, and you're so in the moment and everything's so vivid. It's an incredible way to live when you're actually on an expedition. But when the expedition finishes, you have these really deep lows where you're kind of like, what am I doing with myself? Like, why am I here? Like, what's the point? And it's not really, it's not necessarily a very healthy way to live. And it's a lot less glamorous than it seems, right? Because you come back and basically be broke, like you're not really qualified to necessarily do any jobs. You don't have any, you don't have the underlying skills to just jump back into the workforce and be like, okay, I'm just going to like work a normal job for 6 months and earn some money and then, plan for the next thing. You basically come back and you end up, sitting around basically being poor and not particularly qualified to do much apart from plan another expedition, which then involves going out and begging people for more money for sponsorship. And so there are nice things about that lifestyle, but there are also really tough things about that lifestyle. And I think I made a decision to some degree to like diversify, as it were.
But it seems from my perspective, knowing you, James, that your job has very much it seems very well aligned to your kind of personal interests, and even your fields of study when it comes to formal education. It seems that you have been able to very much the thing which you can do, which both pays you, but is also seemingly also very much your passion. That's something that a lot of people, for a lot of their life, some people their entire life, fail to ever get that kind of alignment. Was that something kind of by design? Did you feel that there has been almost a bit of a kind of a continuous aim that you've been working on since entering the workforce, or tell me a little bit about that.
So I mean, I think I'd start by saying, I wouldn't want to lie and say that I found paradise. I think it's always a working in progress, right? So I guess I tried to identify like what themes of my life I valued and what things, what my values were, what I found important, and how they linked together. And I guess one of those was, adventures and the outdoors and nature. That's something I really care about. And then I also have always enjoyed like science, and that kind of slightly maybe a little bit geeky, but more it's like geography, science, like understanding the world. Okay, so there's one part of it which is like I just love like challenging myself and like having adventures, but there's another part of it of like liking to understand the way that things work, and the mechanisms behind things, and the reasons why things are occurring.
Just to clarify there, in the natural world specifically, you mean, or
yeah, usually. So like not necessarily like, I mean, even like economic systems and like political systems, and yeah, I like to kind of look at things and be like, why is that happening, or like, what's the reason why that's occurring, and to try and understand, okay, what the ingredients are and what the mechanisms are behind it that cause things to look like they do. And so in that sense, like geography is a great thing to study because it's a spatial science, but it kind of covers the spatial relationships of pretty much anything, whether that's the spatial relationships in global economics, or the spatial relationships between different people, which form the basis of politics and conflict. Or if we're looking about physical geography, basically why rivers flow like they do and why mountain ranges look like they do, because, these are all relationships of the way that things interact with each other in a spatial sense. That's something which I've always found interesting. And so I guess I try to think of how can I try and build myself, a career which has elements of, the outdoors and enjoying the outdoors and protecting the outdoors, with elements of understanding why things work, helping other people understand why things work like they do, and understand the mechanisms to hopefully help us find better ways of doing things. And so I think those were the kind of key ingredients. And so that's the reason actually why I started, or why I did a PhD, was because I thought that would be kind of the perfect way to do research and like really investigate kind of new things, create new knowledge, but also to get to go on some cool field trips and do some cool expeditions. And as part of my PhD, I went to some really interesting places, and that was fantastic. I guess the reality came that once you finish your PhD, then you have to like move on to something else, which is, I guess becoming like a tenured professor, and then that's quite a different reality in terms of what's required from you, as opposed to being a PhD student, and being able to really focus on your research. So yeah, so then we kind of made a practical readjustment again to be like, okay, I want to make sure that, I guess one of the challenges in academia is unless you are literally, the world's leading academic in a certain area, it's quite hard to be certain that more than about 5 people are reading what you're writing. So if
you say that, in preparation for this episode, I of course Googled to understand more about what you've done, and I'd still think the 5th or 6th match on Google for James Hooper, at least, obviously there are other famous James Hoopers as well. It's Google Scholar, so it's your work, citations, well indexed, and very much at the front there. So I think
that's a relief. That's a relief. I mean, that's the thing with academia, right? You can feel you devote literally like thousands of hours of your life to turning out something which is so meticulously researched and so well cited and referenced to make sure that it's like can hold up against all of the like peer review and arguments and criticisms that it might get, and particularly if you're researching something that could be like a little controversial to like established wisdom. And you do all of that, and it's such an exhausting process, and then you get to the end of it, and then it like sits behind a paywall on some academic publishing site where a handful of other people can read it. And you just think, like, if I really wanted to make an impact with my 1,000 hours, could I have spent those 1,000 hours in a slightly different way, increase the impact? And that's not necessarily true for everyone. Like, but I kind of, in my own case, I kind of made the conscious decision that
Yeah.
I probably wasn't going to be one of the most, productive academics out there. There are some people who just are able to just write paper after paper after paper after paper. And I enjoy the research. I don't enjoy sitting in front of my computer writing academic papers, right? So the bit for me is like being out in the field, thinking about exciting ideas. The bit where you then have to write that into arguments which can be defended from a million different
Yeah.
people is less exciting to me. And so I thought, rather than spending so much of my time doing that, could I invest that time in a different avenue which would have a larger impact?
Yeah, that resonates with me. There's an element of everything that I put out on social media, whether that's my LinkedIn posts or the podcast and the videos that I do, which is, I've done this, I've edited it, I've put subtitles on, I've put it out there, and not a soul in the entire world is interested in it, even if I try my best to put it out in as many different places as possible, and still. I guess if you still have a belief in what it is you're doing, or either enjoying the process, of course, that helps, or you believe you have something to share, to tell, then that also will allow you to keep going. I'm always an advocate of, when people approach me, and they're thinking about a move or a change, it's always getting down to what it is that they feel they could keep doing. I mean, there's things which can pay you $1 million. There's things which could be incredibly fun that you can pursue. There's obviously fame areas as well, but are there things which you can keep doing for the long time, right? Sustainably. Yeah. And that's where, no matter what it is, you will eventually accrue satisfaction from wherever satisfaction comes from you, for you, over time. In that sense, it's cumulative.
No, for sure.
And so I know that you also found your way into the media yourself some years ago. At that time it was. Tell us a little bit about how that came.
I mean, to be honest, I think it was like entirely serendipitous, right? Like it was very much like right place, right time. I think it was a time in career where career was becoming more open to the idea of having foreigners on television programs in Korea, and there was a curiosity. And because there hadn't been really many programs before with foreigners on, it meant that the bar to entry was like relatively low, in the sense that if you look at, say, what the BBC, you wouldn't just like choose some random foreigner and be like, oh, would you like to be on a program? Why? Oh, because you're foreign. That would be you just can't imagine that happening, right? Whereas at the time in Korea, that was a groundbreaking thing to just have a discussion among a group of foreigners, and really the only qualification was that you could speak a relatively decent level of Korean, and so I think I was very lucky. I think at the time, I think that it was like, basically I was finishing university. I was in my final semester. I just published a paper. Like, it was my first academic paper, and I just published that. And I think the university had done a press release about it, because it's unusual for like an undergraduate to write a peer-reviewed academic paper. So they did a press release about it, and I think the producer from this show had seen this article in the newspaper, and as they were going through, compiling a list of potential foreigners that they could invite to be on the show, my name got put on the list. And I had no idea at all. I got a call one day and they said, oh, we're making this show, would you be interested? And I was like, oh, well, I'm actually planning to move to Australia to do a PhD in a few months' time, but if that's not a problem, then yeah, sure, like why not? And I think I was under the impression that it would just be that there would be a show and it would be like one episode of like me speaking about the UK, and another episode of someone speaking about Germany, and another episode of someone speaking about Italy or something. I think I'd sort of slightly misunderstood. And I went for an interview, and they were like, oh yeah, please come in. And all of a sudden there was this big long table with maybe like 20 people sitting down. They're all with laptops and like recorders, and they're asking me these questions. And I was like, oh wow, this is very different. When I assumed it would be, I'd done some like magazine interviews in Korea before, and had some reporter meet me at a cafe and take some notes. And so that's what I'd been picturing. And all of a sudden I walked into this room, which was like, full of people. I was like, oh, this is obviously a bit bigger than I was expecting. Yeah. And then I guess I was lucky. They called me and said, yes, we'd like you to be involved. And and it was a completely new experience. It was kind of terrifying, like being on this, TV set and surrounded by all of these other foreign people who spoke, seemingly much better Korean than I did or do. And so that, is kind of imposter syndrome in some ways, where you're like, oh wow, like everyone seems to speak better Korean than I do. Like, how am I gonna survive on this? But I mean, as I said, I was planning to move to Australia, so I only the first 4 episodes and then moved to Australia. But I actually left Korea before the first episode was aired.
Okay.
And and then obviously having left, I then kind of started to hear the feedback that it had been kind of super popular, and the show obviously became like a really big thing. And and that was bizarre, especially like not being in Korea, because like all of the I guess now friends who I'd shot the show with, they all got to kind of experience in real time how that transition occurred. Whereas for me, I left Korea, not knowing, and then I think I came back to Korea 6 months later, and had to kind of hide because I went outside. I think I went shopping somewhere, and literally straight away someone recognized me. It was like, can I take a photo with you? And then before I knew it, there was like a queue of people, and
Wow.
and the problem is that I guess, I don't know, because I'm British, but like I feel I can't say no to people, right? So then someone wants to take a photo. Can I take a photo with you? Like, oh, okay. And then someone else, oh, can I take a photo with you? Oh, okay. And then you're like standing there for half an hour, and everyone's staring at you, and it's like very, it's kind of embarrassing. And so yeah, it was a bizarre experience, and I was extremely lucky, but it really was. I was just in the right place.
Well, I don't know whether the sound is coming across to you, but it sounds like my neighbours in the next studio are really putting a full gusto into recording. So I hope that the audio will still come out smoothly. I feel like we haven't, talked about all that we necessarily wanted to talk about. We've covered a lot. And yet we're pretty much out of time. Maybe we can say, with your willingness, that we call this a part 1, and maybe we look to make a part 2 in the near future. But for now, James, if people would like to contact you or find out more about what you do, what would be the best way for them to get in touch?
So, I mean, I have a website, which I think is live, which is james-hooper.com. But if for whatever reason that's not live, which there's a chance because I'm not the biggest tech guru, is to, on Instagram, if you search James N Hooper on Instagram, then yeah, you can find me on Instagram. And that's probably a more foolproof way, which will more certainly be able to be accessed. So.
Well, we'll be sure to link both of those in the show notes for those of you who want to get in touch. James, thank you so much for being a guest on this episode. And maybe it wasn't visible from the start, but I'm always repping my "Let's get stuff done" as the theme. So yeah, James, thanks so much for today.
No, thank you very much, Gordon.
All right, and remember, let's get stuff done.